Hi there, I'm Tom Spencer. This week on Central Texas Gardener, England comes to Texas when William Welch illustrates how English trends influence us today. On tour, see how British childhood memories framed a Texas garden on limestone. Daphne explains why some northern favorites just can't make the move, and Meredith Giles shows us how to design terrariums wherever we live. So let's get growing right here, right now.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.
England's gone to Texas this week. The Stockers built on childhood memories from across the pond when they designed their drought-tough garden on limestone at the edge of the Texas hill country.
This garden is not in England. It's growing on limestone rock in Austin, Texas, where fog is rare and rain is either sparse or often destructive. It's grounded on memories that Jennifer and David Stocker brought with them when they left their childhood homes in northern England and eventually landed in Austin.
The one thing that's really important in England is having your garden walled. It started many years ago, and every single house, almost every single house in England is walled. It doesn't matter whether they just have 6 feet between the house and the road, there will be a wall along the front of the house.
In the Stockers' new home, architect Dick Clark didn't simply wall the whole garden over on a singular level. Instead, he dignified each space as a room of its own, connecting them through diverse portals. He aligned them with the house for views inside and out, keeping in mind that Texas sun is fiercer than in England. After construction, Jenny and David started with barren ground over thin soil.
I knew we wanted a vegetable garden, a herb garden, flower gardens. Also, we love being outside, so we wanted spaces in which we could sit.
The walls made it possible to grow flowers and food.
While walled gardens are part of our heritage, it was a must here, of course, to keep out pests, deer mostly.
The Stockers' walls are not as high as some in historic English estates, intended to keep out people.
They were growing all kinds of vegetables and fruits and some flowers for the house, but the people who lived around were very poor. And you can imagine that if someone's growing something and they have nothing to eat, they're going to go and, in the dead of night, like poaching, and they're going to go and take from the garden.
The Stockers left most of their property open to foraging wildlife to protect their livelihood.
You know, we have so much wildlife: foxes, turkeys, deer, possums, raccoons, everything.
Natural boulders form walls too. But erosion from the slopes could threaten some of their spaces. In one spot, David built a dry stack wall as a barrier, hauling 5 tons of rocks uphill.
But I've got to say, I'm proud of my Great Wall.
In the part of the country that we lived in, there were a lot of limestone rocks, and the farmers used these limestone rocks to create the walls in their fields. And of course, coming to this part of Texas is just a dream.
David moved a lot of boulders to frame their central sunken garden, another English design.
I know my grandparents built a sunken garden. They just add interest, changing levels. My idea of doing our sunken garden at the back had to be on a Texas style because we had these big ledgestone rocks and they were just perfect. We can use these rocks instead of having them carted away at great expense. There is some decomposed granite under there because to begin with we had decomposed granite. It was just becoming impossible to control the plants that were seeding in there. So we decided that we would put down some Arizona sandstone and just leave maybe 1-inch spaces in between. I'm just the controller. I go out there and I remove ones that I don't want, and then I leave the other ones that every year something, pops up, seeds, one dies, and then a new one takes its place.
Jenny mingles native and non-native annuals and perennials, punctuating with southwestern succulents and cacti. To the left, walk down to the potager that adjoins the organic vegetable garden. Over the bedrock, they built composted raised beds.
Along the edge of the vegetable garden, along the wall, and we put in a low raised bed. I knew I wasn't going to grow vegetables in there. It was going to be something more floral, to bring bees into the garden.
To formalize it with firm footing, too, David handcrafted pavers to the size and custom color they wanted.
Just how many did you make? 150 patio stones using a wooden frame with 3 stones in it.
In the end, it was 180.
To the right of the sunken garden, they built an English-style garden.
My thought there was to use circles. And together, David and I built the patio in there, which is a circle. And then following that, David continued with another large circle which surrounds the bird bath, just out of brick.
Here, Jenny built her first dry stack wall.
I made this pile of stone when they were building the house. Every day I came out, and if a flat rock appeared, I would put it on one side because I knew I was going to do a dry stone wall. It doesn't really look like an English garden because there's no grass in there, but we called it the English garden because of the dry stone wall.
Against one side of the house, they formed a private nook, framed by walls covered with fig ivy. Still named the Spanish oak garden, drought felled the trees that once shaded it. Ever resourceful, Jenny found a solution and a bargain at an estate sales half-price day. In front, David used mirrors to unite the walls with the home's upper windows. Just inside, the Stockers designed a courtyard garden. Its dry creek bed is more than a charming feature.
With the walls that surround the house and the gardens, when we get very heavy rain, we have to be sure of getting the rainwater out. The dry creek continues outside.
Jenny customizes her own containers with hypertufa, a mixture of peat, perlite, and Portland cement. One reminds her of English farmstone troughs, imitated by gardeners like her grandmother, who used the method on old sinks.
And I must say, the novelty of the shapes that you can create using this technique is really quite surprising.
What we really do need in our gardens are features. You have to have something to pull the eye. You can't just have plantings.
The concept of cottage gardening came in during the Victorian period. Before then, the more stately homes favored lawns.
They banished flowers from the garden during that period, during the 1700s. There were no flowers to be seen. They hid the flowers away. And then when it came into the 1800s, flowers came back into the garden again. So people were building, cottage gardens, and they were mixing all the common flowers with vegetables, allowing things to self-seed. I think we have somewhat of a cottage garden here.
I love that garden. It's a great evocation of England right here in the Texas Hill Country. And right now we're going to be talking about the impact of English gardening on us here in Texas and actually throughout the United States, because there's a rich legacy associated with English gardens. And here joining me is Bill Welsh, probably better, more steeped in the knowledge about this than anybody I can think of. Bill, it's great to have you back on Central Texas Gardener.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here and to talk about a really fun topic.
Well, it is fun, and I know that you visit English gardens and you teach about garden history to many, many different people. What is it about English gardens that still has a hold on our imaginations, even after a couple hundred years of independence here?
Well, that's true. It's there's just something about it we can't seem to escape. But English history and the beauty of English gardens are very much in our memories, I guess, from books and certainly from travel, from films.
Yeah.
All of these things. We think about things like Anne Hathaway's garden, you know,
Sure.
at Stratford-upon-Avon. But the romance of these cottage gardens in England, again, is something that we've reproduced in various interpretations here in Texas. But it does go back to the English system.
Well, you know, you referenced the cottage garden, and you know, I've been giving garden lectures for decades, and every time I flash up, you can show pictures of these gardens from all over the world. You put up an English cottage garden picture, and everybody in the audience just goes, "Ooh!" That's what it's kind of embedded in people's minds. That is what they want. That's what they envision in a garden.
It is. I think one thing is that cottage gardens give us an excuse to have a mixture of all sorts of things. And we can have this eclectic mix, but at the same time, the really effective ones have enough bones in them or enough structure to give that contrast, and that really helps us to appreciate the mix that we see there.
It's high artifice that looks natural.
It is. It truly is. It truly is, and it's the way we can bring in small fruits, vegetables. Certainly the different shapes of flowers become really important. You know, the spike flowers, the ray flowers, all of these sorts of things.
Counterpointing plants that are just green or gray. You know.
That's right. Different foliaged color plants and so forth. And here in Central Texas, we can go to some spiky things that you know we can interpret it into our own vocabulary here with things like red yuccas and agaves and plants such as that. Bring it very much into reality for us here.
So it really is, I think, and when we think about the cottage garden side of the English equation, you know, as you reference, you have that kind of flowing series of forms and colors that looks so natural. But you also reference the bones part, and that's something to me that I really want to stress that to our viewers, that this is something, you know, they may, like I said, they may look natural, but they're really highly designed.
Well, the most effective ones are, and they have this contrast of having a hedge or a wall. Of course, stone in this part of the world is fabulous material, but we can also do it with hedges. We can do it with fencing to give us some structure. We can get into a few overhead structures occasionally. Certainly, in our climate, it makes so much sense to have a little shade in the summer.
Arbor, yes.
And our early ancestors smartly brought those into the landscape because. The most appropriate place in the whole garden in the summertime is under a shade structure, you know, with vines.
Also, there's a sense in English gardens, when you talk about the bone side of it, there is a sense of sequence and rooms and very designated kinds of spaces. Yes,
there very definitely is. And the way you get from one of those spaces to another is quite often with walks. And these can be gravel, they can be other materials. But taking one person from one part of the garden to another, and of course the whole idea of the outdoor living space. And many of us are dealing with smaller spaces these days, and to be able to increase our living space by having some outdoor space. And if you're on the inside looking into some of these areas, it's still another great opportunity.
And there's a way too that you kind of accessorize a garden like this. You create rooms by, for one thing, providing a place to sit.
Yes.
But there are also centerpieces that draw your eye and hold your gaze.
There truly are. We can do this with art. We can do it with container plants. We can do it with sculpture.
Sure.
Lots of different ways that can be done. I think the container plant thing is a fascinating one. We can go into areas of the garden that maybe too shady for color plants, and we can do it seasonally with container plants. We can do things that tolerate a lot of dryness in containers, which again makes a lot of sense for us here because we're all out to use less water in our landscape. So you have to create these very interesting English looks.
Right, yeah, and even the native plants here require a drink a day in the summertime. Most everything, if they're in a container.
Most everything really does that has a preference. There's for sure, but we've got a lot of succulents that really will tolerate actually weeks without water in this area. So there's the containers are good accessories for us, and the pots themselves, can be a very, very nice addition. And cut flowers from the garden into the house, again, a very English type thing. Having an area for some cutting things to bring in is another.
Yeah, absolutely. Bringing the outdoors in, and also integrating kind of the architecture. One thing that I think about English gardens is often there's some element of the architecture of the home or the manner that is reflected in the garden, and maybe the materials used or something like that. There's a reflexive quality to it.
There really is. There truly is. It's good design. But the real genius of the English look, I think, is this mixture of different sizes and shapes and forms and flower shapes and colors, and the massing of them, but then contrasting that with some structure of some kind. And again, the structure can be clipped plants, or it can be walls, or it can be hedges or fences.
Okay. Well, when people start to assemble a bed, when we see the end product in a gorgeous image, it looks, again, so natural. It's hard to envision how you pull that together as a design. But there are some simple rules to that, right? I mean, you choose a color palette, for example, and you repeat things.
Well, it's good to think about all these different possibilities before and try them. I mean, you can get plants and set them around and try them in different ways. But one of the exciting things about this English concept to me is you can work and work and work at it, and then all of a sudden something pops up on its own somewhere, and it's better than anything you thought of.
I think that is part of the charm and the beauty of gardening in that style, is the fact that you can try to again set a palette choice. You can set the big plants at the back of the bed, the medium-sized plants. You can use them in rhythms, sequences, et cetera, et cetera. But over time, they're going to move around and do their own thing.
They are. And something's going to pop up where you didn't necessarily plan it. And if you're open-minded about it, you'll realize that sometimes those things are better than some of the things you thought of.
Right. There's knowing how to group the plants and knowing the needs of the plants, I think, is really essential too.
It is. It's a very practical thing to understand the needs of the plants, and you don't want to, extremely high water use plant next to something that wants practically no water.
Right.
And so that becomes a major part of things, is to put plants together that are compatible.
Right.
But of course we're looking at growing compatible, but then we're also looking at visually compatible, and the textural contrasts that we can get in a few plants for foliage. A few artemisias, for instance, or something like that. Bringing in the gray and the different texture. Some of our sedums and the Mexican sedums are just wonderful for this area.
Right.
Low water use and again can give us a lot of visual impact.
Right. Well, Bill, I just want to give a shout out to your more recent book, Heirloom Gardening in the South. You've done books on the topic before. This relates very directly to the topic of English gardening. So many of the plants have that heirloom quality to them. But it's always a great pleasure to have you on the program, and we really value you, and I want to go to England with you sometime.
Well, we need to do that. We truly do. I've missed the last year and a half of being there, and I'm about ready to go back. So maybe we can find a little mission to accomplish that.
Well, thank you again, Bill Welch, for being our guest on Central Texas
Gardener.
Thank
you, Tom. Great being here.
Coming up next is Daphne.
Hi, Hi, I'm Daphne Richards. Our question this week is, why can't we plant our favorite northeastern, midwestern plants here in Central Texas? You know, it's normal to want to plant non-native plants in your gardens, especially if you've just moved to the south or west from a colder, rainier climate. Your instinct naturally goes to the plants that you're familiar with, and this impulse is actually more ingrained in us than you might realize. The first botanists in the United States brought with them plants from their native European homes. They also brought along plants that were collected and treasured by British and European botanists who were the world's leading plant collectors at a time when interest in botany was skyrocketing. And so the plants that were brought with the Brits became very popular in the nursery trade, and so did plants that were native to the northeastern U.S. Along with the development of our nation, our gardening interests also developed, as did businesses that served those interests. So our gardening knowledge is based on that northeastern foundation, making us long for the beautiful plants like peonies that we've been trained to love. But there's a lot to love about our native southwestern plants too. It just takes a little more time, research, and attention to develop that love. These stunning peony specimens do quite well in the Ohio garden of Kylie Baumley of the blog Our Little Acre. Our plant this week is lamb's ears, Stachys byzantina, which thrives in our hot, arid climate. Even if you've never seen these plants in person, it's obvious from pictures that it gets its name from the overwhelming fuzziness of its pretty little gray leaves. This is definitely a plant grown for its foliage, but the purple flower spikes are also attractive through the summer. Lamb's ears are perennial and are very easy care plants in Central Texas landscapes. Although listed as full sun, they'll do best in hotter climates if protected from the intense heat of the late afternoon. Lamb's ears do best in well-drained soil and may rot in heavy clay soils, especially during cold, wet winters. And adding a little compost to planting beds, if you can, would be a good idea. Being perennial, the top portion of the plant will die back in late fall or early winter, so give them a good pruning after you notice that the top growth is dead. These gorgeous little woolly plants can tolerate cold temperatures well below freezing, so the roots don't need much protection in winter. Getting only 6 to 8 inches tall and a foot wide, lamb's ears make great border plants in the front of garden beds. Our viewer picture this week comes from Stan and Jean with their darling little German Shepherd, Loki. I think if I had such a beautiful native landscape, I'd want to romp around in it too, and so would Augie. To do in your garden this week, it's time to plant and prune your trees, and it's also time to plant and prune roses. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your questions and pictures from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with Meredith Giles for Backyard Basics.
Hi friends, Meredith Giles here with Backyard Basics. And today we're going to talk about terrariums and how to make your own. The art of terrariums actually dates back to Victorian England. It did see a big resurgence in the 70s when I was a kid, and now we're seeing a comeback here in the 2000s. Now there's 2 or 3 different types of terrariums you can make. Generally they're made in some type of a glass bowl, but you can also do them in a plastic bowl or something of that nature. But the 2 main types we're going to have are going to be an open terrarium, where it actually allows air to come out, or a closed terrarium such as this that actually is closed and keeps all its moisture and air inside. Now one thing we've seen a lot of are people combining the trend of succulents and terrariums to make a succulent terrarium. And if you're going to do that, you definitely want to do an open type so that it can get enough fresh air and breathe. But with any of the other small tropical plants that we use, you can actually do the closed type terrariums like this one or this with these ferns or something along those lines. So making a terrarium is really very easy. You're going to start with some kind of a container. I've chosen a nice glass bowl here today, and I'm doing an open one because it's a little easier to demonstrate with. Now terrariums, to be successful, really need to be built in layers. So our first layer is going to be some kind of an aggregate. Today we put some pea gravel in the bottom. And then the next layer we're going to add is actually going to be some charcoal. Now the charcoal layer doesn't have to be very thick, it's just a thin layer, but this will actually help to absorb any odors or things like that that might occur. Now one vitally important part of making a terrarium is that we're actually going to use what is called a soilless mix. Now I know that sounds kind of strange, but a soilless mix is actually a potting soil that doesn't have any dirt or compost or anything like that in it. It's all inert material. That way, if it does stay moist, you're not going to have problems with things starting to decompose too quickly, rot, and make smells and things like that. So we've got a nice soilless mix here, and we're just going to add a small layer of that in here. And really from here, it's kind of like potting just about anything. We've got our soil in there. We're going to take 2 or 3 different plants. I've got a nice little peperomia here that we'll put right in the front. You know, like any kind of mixed planter, we just want to make sure that we build it up in layers. We want to make our shorter plants out towards the edge and our taller plants in the middle. Nice strawberry begonia here. This guy will look really nice. And then finally, we got this Nepenthes here. And we'll put him right in there. And now, of course, if we needed any more soil, we'll just pack that in around there. We're going to water this just like we would water most things. We're going to let it dry slightly between waterings. The nice thing about a glass container is you can actually see how much water's in there. One vitally important thing is always start with less water and add more if you feel like you need to. If you put too much water in, you can't get it out. I like to use a little mister or something like that. I think that's a great way to water them. So making a terrarium is really fun and simple. Anybody can do it. There are lots of different options available to you. My name is Meredith Giles, and this is Backyard Basics. Have a great day.
Find out more at klru.org/CTG and visit us on Facebook too. Next week, let's get growing organic fruit. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
Support for Central Texas Gardener comes from GeoGrowers, offering custom soil blends for lawns, gardens, xeriscaping, and organic landscaping supplies. More information at geogrowers.net.